You're listening to The Philosopher's Note on Ken Wilber. More wisdom in less time.
Hi, this is Brian welcoming you to Philosopher's Notes on Ken Wilber. These are notes and comments on wisdom I've gleaned from some books and workshops. Here's a quote from Ken Wilber from One Taste, July 31st. He says, "In the heart of emptiness, there is a mysterious impulse. Mysterious because there is actually nothing in the heart of emptiness. For there is nothing in emptiness, period. Yet there it is, this mysterious impulse, the impulse to create, to sing, to shine, to radiate, to send forth, reach out, and celebrate, to sing and shout and walk about, to effervesce and bubble over, this mysterious exuberance in the heart of emptiness." Ken Wilber, the integral philosopher and mystic, the guy with the intimidating and penetrating stare on the cover of those books of his. I don't know about you, but for a couple of years I actually avoided his book, A Brief History of Everything, as it stared at me from my bookshelf. A brief history of what? And quit looking at me like that, dude. If you know the book cover, you know what I'm talking about. So I started my immersion in Ken's work with his brilliant interview series with Tammy Simon of Sounds True. Can't recommend that enough. I remember being blown away by the scope of his vision, his ridiculous ability to communicate complex ideas, and his sense of humor. At one point, Tammy asked him something along the lines of whether he was enlightened. That wasn't it, but close enough. And his reply was, in effect, that he was still an asshole on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That cracked me up and won me over. I actually didn't read my first book of Ken's until after I'd already spent 8 days in his workshops, the iWet and ILP, which I highly recommend, both of those. And I still hadn't read one of his books until after I'd spent a couple hours chatting with him in person in Denver. At that time, I was just getting started with Zods, and we had an awesome chat about all things integral, community-related, and internet-related. Although not an integral wonk, my worldview has fundamentally shifted thanks to Ken and his awesome team at the Integral Institute. I owe a huge debt to them for what I've learned and how I've transformed, intellectually and in my practical day-to-day life. In this note, I'm not going to go into any level of detail on the theory. For those in the know, I'm not even going to talk about AQUIL. Gasp. The new Integral Vision book is an awesome intro to all that stuff, which I highly recommend you check out if you're looking for a quick introduction to Ken Wilber and integral theory. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up these few pages and these few minutes with you with some of my favorite big ideas that we can apply to our lives today. And in the process, if you're new to Ken's work, I hope to inspire you to get you into it. And if you're already an integral wonk, I hope to inspire you to find even more ways to live the integral ideals and ideas that have captured our attention. All right, enough of my soliloquy. That's a tough word to say. Let's get to work. We'll start with the big idea of integral philosophy. All right. I'm kind of stretching out here and stretching my brain. Are you ready to jump in? So if we're going to talk about Ken Wilber, we should start by talking about integrative or integral thinking. Think about it like this. Today is the first time in history that all of the great teachers of all of the great traditions can easily be studied. In fact, we can do it all in the same day. We're experiencing an integration of cultures, from shared philosophies to shared recipes. It's unprecedented in the history of mankind. That's a pretty powerful thing. So powerful, in fact, that Ken would say, and I would agree, that we are entering the integral age. We've gone through the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Age, the Information Age. Welcome to the integral age. What else do you think historians will call it 500 years from now? So, the idea of integral is to integrate as many traditions across cultures and across disciplines and across time as possible. It's a cool pursuit, and something Ken and his big brain have done an incredible job of tackling. So let's look at some of the fruits of that labor, shall we? We will start with holons and you. All right, holons. It's a really cool concept that we need to understand to get some of the other important ideas of integral philosophy. Here's what you need to know. Everything in the universe is a holon. That together form what are called holarchies. It's a whole thing by itself, a holon is, and it's also, very importantly, always, yes, always part of a whole. So think about that and try to think of one thing that isn't part of something bigger and not made up of something smaller. You can't. You can't take away cells from your body and still have you. You can't take away atoms from a molecule and still have a molecule. Every higher level transcends and includes the prior. The molecule transcends and includes the atom. The cell transcends and includes the molecule. We transcend and include the cells. Does that make sense? This is relevant because we tend to get in trouble when we attempt to transcend and exclude something. It violates reality, and you typically want to avoid doing that. Okay, so I'm going to jump straight into one application of this so we can bring it to life immediately. Have you ever heard of spiral dynamics? It's very cool stuff put forward by Don Beck and Chris Cowan. It's a simple model that is useful to get a handle on the more complex ideas Ken uses to walk through stages of development and a bunch of other stuff. I'm going to share this here because I think it'll help us bring holons and transcending including to life in a powerful way. Although it isn't really integral theory per se, it is a nice little stepping stone towards some more interesting ideas, and I think you'll enjoy it. So here's the quick overview. People and cultures go through different stages of development, and the spiral guys like to color code them to make it easier to keep track. It goes like this. You have red. You can think terrible twos, kind of thing of, I'll blow you up if you piss me off. Yikes. Then you have blue. Think 10 Commandments, fundamentalist anything. Rules are paramount. Literal interpretations of the Bible are absolutely, god damn it, correct. Then you have orange. Think Wall Street or academia. Science and ambition are key here. Then you have green. Think environmentalism, pluralism, all is one, non-violence. So the idea goes that we all, necessarily, evolve through different stages of development. All of those stages we just looked at are part of what are called the first tier. Here's the funny thing about those perspectives. They're all convinced they're 100% right. It's like a big food fight. Green looks at orange and says, you greedy capitalists, you're good for nothing and totally destroying our planet. And my non-violent self hates you. Orange looks at green and says, you tree-hugging new agey hippies, get a job and contribute to the economy, will you? And get a haircut and quit gazing at those crystals, would you? All right, and blue looks at everyone and says, you're going to hell because you don't believe in insert my favorite god here. Again, god damn it. And then red looks at everyone and says, words I can't even say, I'm blowing your ass up. Think suicide bomber kind of thing again, remember? Everything is either or. No one can see the validity of the other perspectives. Not so good. The ideal? Let's consciously evolve as individuals and as a culture to a second-tier level of consciousness. Here, for the first time, we can hold multiple perspectives. We can see that, in Ken's words, no one is smart enough to be 100% wrong. So what's that look like? Well, you can see the truth in the need to take care of our environment, and the need for a powerful economy, and the need for rules and regulations, and the need to take aggressive action when the situation demands it. You can healthfully embody each of the colors on the spiral. None of them are bad per se, but what we want to do is have healthful expressions of each, and not be stuck rigidly into one. That's what second tier is all about. Because every stage has a partial truth. To embrace the whole, we need to transcend and include. It's powerful, really powerful stuff. Now, notice that each level transcends the prior. However, it isn't until we reach the second tier that we're able to transcend and include the prior levels of development. You see how much trouble we get into when we transcend and exclude prior levels of development? I mean, food fights are fun on occasion, but every moment of our lives, not so cool. So transcend and include. Pretty please. Throw some agave on there. And thank you. So this leads to perhaps the most powerful practical application of my integral studies, in my own experience anyway. Learning how to say yes and. So that's the next big idea. Yes and. And again, remember, no one is smart enough to be 100% wrong. And what that means, stated positively, is that everyone has, however small, a partial truth to their position. They're not smart enough to be 100% wrong. And why is this relevant? Well, if you want to have good relationships, whether it's with your spouse or with your enemy, in quotes, you'll be wise to first acknowledge the partial truth of the other person, ideology, country, whatever. Yes, that includes Bush if you hate him or his policies. He's not all wrong. We need to protect ourselves, obviously, in my opinion, not in the manner in which he's done it. But if you can't begin by acknowledging this truth in his policy, you're not going to get very far. You'll be slipping on the banana peels from the first-tier food fight you're in. Green against orange, blue, not very helpful. Yes, that includes Osama bin Laden. He's not all wrong. America's foreign policy is anything but perfect. Obviously, his tactics are horrific. But if you can't start by seeing his partial truth, however partial, again, you're screwed. The world isn't black and white. Quit seeing it as either this or that. That just isn't how it works, at least not how it functions well. It's not either a free market economy or compassion. It's yes, a free market economy and compassion. It's not either you can be in integrity with your spiritual practice or you can become extraordinarily wealthy. It's yes, my spiritual practice is my top priority, and I manifest my spiritual practice in creative service that makes me extraordinarily wealthy. So where do you get stuck? Start paying attention to where you see things as a little too either or, and insert a healthy dose of yes and. A good indicator, by the way, that you're seeing things a little too either or is you're arguing with somebody and you're kind of attached to it and you're getting emotional about it. Step back, witness it, take a deep breath, and see how you can recognize a truth in the other person's perspective. And say, I can see the truth in this, and here's how I see it as well. That makes sense? I hope so. Well, that reminds me of being able to witness our perspectives, which is the only way we can ever evolve to a higher one, huh? This big idea is called subject and object. I was actually introduced to this by my integral coach, Bert Parley, a great guy who's kind of like Ken's chief of staff. When we started working together, Bert's first homework assignment for me was to read the first chapter of Robert Keegan's classic book, In Over Our Heads. It's fascinating stuff. The big idea, subject-object orientations. Try this one on. How you see the world is your subjective perspective. What you look at through that subjective perspective is the object of that subjective perspective. So far, so good? Now here's the trick. Can you make your current subjective perspective the object of a new perspective? In other words, can you step back and look at the current way you see the world? It sounds simple and easy, but it's a really powerful thing to be able to do. When we're not locked into one perspective on the world, we have the ability to shift into a higher, healthier way to see things. Most of us tend to get locked into our perspective and think it's the absolute truth. That, as you know, is not very effective. And this was particularly powerful for me because I saw that I was totally locked into one perspective at the time. I was locked into my identity as the CEO of Zods, the company I started and was running then. It was the weirdest thing. Until that moment, I couldn't see just how attached I was to the company, how my identity was the company. And any threat to it, there were many threats, by the way, almost missing payroll several times is not fun. But any threat to the business's survival was a threat to my survival and my identity. It was fascinating to observe this. Actually, it was a lot more than just fascinating. It was absolutely transformative and catalyzed the sale of the business within less than 90 days of that realization. Pretty powerful stuff. I also really like to use this idea of the subject and object orientation in my intimate relationship. The only time my goddess and I get stuck in an argument is when I have become my position. The moment I can step back and observe and witness the situation and my perspective on it, I create the spaciousness needed to allow the space for her perspective. Suddenly, there's no need to argue and the tension dissolves. We still may not see eye to eye perfectly, but I can enter the dialogue less from my head and more from my heart, allowing us, you could say, to see heart to heart as we continue our dialogue. Whole new perspective for me. Very powerful. So, how are you stuck? What can you do to witness yourself more? In Keegan's language, can you make your current subjective perspective, how you're currently seeing the world, the object of a new perspective? One that you can be a little less attached to and a little more open to evolving. Good. And don't forget to smile while you do it. Remember, this is all supposed to be fun. Very, very fun. All right, that brings us to the next big idea, states and stages. States and stages. Quickly, we've all had moments of inspiration. Whether it's that time when we're in flow as we write or paint or speak, or when we're on some psychedelic trip and see the interconnectedness in ways we've never dreamt of. Hasn't really been my path, but that's certainly a path. Or when we're making love and feel that ineffable union with our partner's mind, body, and spirit. Whatever catalyzes your state experiences, it's really only a nice little balloon that'll lose its air in a week and lay shriveled on the floor unless you can create the structures in your life to live from that place of awareness. That requires you to evolve to a new stage of development, at which point the state experience is normal. States and stages. Does that make sense? So, in my opinion, too many spiritual people have a flash of insight at a rave and come back all wide-eyed and unblinking, telling you about this incredible experience and their newfound enlightenment. Or they come back from the latest empowerment weekend where they picked up the latest secret and tell you how they're unstoppable now. But it's usually almost always not really sticking because they haven't evolved to a point where it's more than just a state experience. They aren't living from a stage of development where the new awareness can stick. And sure enough, a week or two later, they're back to their deflated selves and wondering what the heck happened. The remedy? Honor the state experiences we're blessed to have, but see them for what they are, a taste of what's possible. And know that the way you get to live with those state experiences on a sustainable level is to build the structures in your life that push you forward as a human being. I like to think of it like this. You want to see the world from a certain height? Well, you have a couple of options. You can get shot out of a cannon and see the world from 1,500 feet up. Very briefly. Then what happens? Well, unless you're Superman and fly away and live happily ever after, you come crashing back down to Earth. Ouch. So a much better option, if you want to live from that height, why not build a skyscraper and live from the penthouse suite? Is it too much work? Yeah, probably for most people, but if you want to have any more than the fleeting experience of flying across the sky in a gleeful state experience, you must do the work. You must advance through stages of development. You must dig an incredibly deep foundation. Go into your darkness. Do your shadow work and dig, dig, dig. And then you must patiently erect floor after dozens of floors until, alas, you have a view from one of the highest and most beautiful points in the world. That's states and stages. So are you focusing on your rituals, your meditation, your journaling, your authenticity, your transparency, your fearlessness, your mind, your body, your open heart, other practices to really develop your stages of development? Good. Me too. I look forward to sharing that penthouse suite, or maybe we'll just be neighbors at the top. Should be fun. All right. Now we're moving on to the next big idea, a long favorite quote of mine. This one's called The Integral Sage, and here we go. Ken says, and again, this is probably one of my favorite quotes that I've marked up more than any other. He says, but egoless does not mean less than personal. It means more than personal. Not personal minus, but personal plus. All the normal qualities plus some transpersonal ones. Think of the great yogis, saints, and sages, from Moses to Christ to Padmasambhava. They were not feeble-mannered milquetoast, but fierce movers and shakers. From bullwhips in the temple to subduing entire countries. They rattled the world on its own terms, not in some pie-in-the-sky piety. Many of them instigated massive social revolutions that have continued for thousands of years, and they did so not because they avoided the physical, emotional, and mental dimensions of humanness and the ego that is their vehicle, but because they engaged them with a drive and intensity that shook the world to its very foundations. The great yogis, saints, and sages accomplished so much precisely because they were not timid little toadies, but great big egos, plugged into the dynamic ground and goal of the cosmos itself, plugged into their own higher self, alive to the pure Atman, the pure I that is one with Brahman. They opened their mouths and the world trembled, fell to its knees, and confronted its radiant God. There is certainly a type of truth to the notion of transcending ego. It doesn't mean destroy the ego. It means plug it into something bigger. Put bluntly, the ego is not an obstruction to spirit, but a radiant manifestation of spirit. The integral sage, the non-dual sage, is here to show us otherwise. Known generally as tantric, these sages insist on transcending life by living it. They insist on finding release by engagement, finding nirvana in the midst of samsara, finding total liberation by complete immersion. End quote. That quote gets me a little fired up. That is from One Taste, November 17th. If you haven't checked out One Taste, that's also a brilliant place to get into Ken's work. Incredibly deep philosophical and intellectual stuff mixed with equally incredible mystical, beautiful poetry. So the chapter from which those incredible thoughts are lifted wins the award for the most underlined chapter in all of my books. And that's what I just gave you, a tiny fraction of the grand mojo, and that chapter alone is worth the price of that book, One Taste. So I'm still kind of absorbing the power of those words, so I'll simply suggest perhaps a rewind and re-listen, or 5, and more importantly, an embodiment of that wisdom if it resonates for you. My vote, let's plug into our highest selves and become the radiant manifestation of spirit that is our destiny. All right, I hope you enjoyed that quick look, and I hope I inspired you to learn more about Ken. Here's a little bit more about Ken Wilber. He's one of the most widely read and influential American philosophers of our time. His writings have been translated into over 20 languages. He lives in Denver, Colorado. That's adapted from the book. You can learn more about all things Wilber at kenwilber.com. You can learn more about all things Integral by checking out the Integral website, the nonprofit that Ken started, integralinstitute.org. And if you want to build an integral life practice, check out myilp.com. And if you're new to Integral, Amazon the new book, Integral Vision, a very short introduction to the revolutionary integral approach to life, God, the universe, and everything. That is the full title of it. Get that and get your integral mojo on. All right, well, if you enjoyed that, I think you'd like so many other of the pieces, including Tony Robbins, the Philosopher's Notes on Tony Robbins, on Ralph Waldo Emerson, on the gifted adult, on authentic happiness, and on man's search for meaning. All right, time for a quick look at some of those quotes that are on the sidebar of the PDF, and then we'll call it a day. Here's a quote from Ken Wilber from A Brief History of Everything. He says, "Integrative simply means that this approach attempts to include as many important truths from as many disciplines as possible, from the East as well as the West, from pre-modern and modern and postmodern, from the hard sciences of physics to the tender sciences of spirituality. As one critic put it, this integrative approach, quote, honors and incorporates more truth than any approach in history, end quote. I would obviously like to believe that is true, but you can best be the judge of that as you read the following pages." Here's another quote from Ken's Brief History of Everything. "Arthur Koestler coined the term holon to refer to an entity that is itself a whole and simultaneously a part of some other whole. For instance, a whole atom is part of a whole molecule, and the whole molecule is part of a whole cell, and the whole cell is part of a whole organism, and so on. Each of these entities is neither a whole nor a part, but a whole part, a holon. And a couple more quotes from A Brief History of Everything. So spirit is both the highest level in the holarchy, but it's also the paper on which the entire holarchy is written. It's the highest rung in the ladder, but it's also the wood out of which the entire ladder is made. And evolution goes beyond what went before, but because it must embrace what went before, then its very nature is to transcend and include, and thus it has an inherent directionality, a secret impulse toward increasing depth, increasing intrinsic value, increasing consciousness. In order for evolution to move at all, it must move in those directions. There's no place else for it to go. Quote from Albert Einstein, he says, "A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison." And Ken's No Boundary has this quote in it. "Thus, ultimately, to try to escape a distress merely perpetuates that distress. What is so upsetting is not the distress itself, but our attachment to that distress. We identify with it, and that alone is the real difficulty." And finally, one more quote from A Brief History of Everything. "States still must be converted to traits. You still have to go from acorn to oak if you are going to become one with the forest. So while states are important, stages are even more important." All right, well, that was a very quick look at one of my favorite teachers. Hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, have fun embodying the ideals of the integral sage. I appreciate you listening, and I hope you have a great day.
We hope you enjoyed this Philosopher's Note. Please go to www.philosophersnotes.com to download more.